So first of all, let's introduce Jade. So Jade is a CEO of her own law firm, aged just 32, which is fantastic, is a presiding judge of the STEP Private Client Awards, is a director of the Solicitors for the Elderly, is the Young Practitioner of the Year for both the British Wills and Probate Awards and the STEP Awards, and is the director and co-founder of the Wishing Will Foundation. So fantastic accomplishments there. But what many of you might not know is that she was the first person in her family to go to university, and she lives with invisible disabilities and illnesses. And indeed, throughout her career, has suffered from anxiety, depression, imposter syndrome, and burnout. So there's some really interesting conversations here today and really interesting questions. And thank you in advance, Jade, for sharing these kind of things with you.
You're very welcome.
First question out there, what got you into private client? Why was private client the choice that you made from a career perspective?
It wasn't actually much of a choice that I made, funnily enough. I never expected that I'd be working in private client. In fact, I used to be absolutely petrified of even the thought of death. And when I came out of university, I got some work experience at a firm called Be Legal in Marlow. And it was just a week's sort of free work experience. I was working for the family law sort of partner there. And I kept finishing the task she was giving me quite quickly, and then she ran out of things to do. So she said, look, why don't you ask the practice manager? And the practice manager was this phenomenal woman, Lynn, a real battle axe of a lady. You didn't want to get on her wrong side, but she was sat opposite me where I was, and I was asking her and helping her out with a few admin tasks. And at the time, she was actually training a property paralegal. Anyway, she had to keep repeating herself, and I wasn't looking at the systems that they were looking at. And yet, it came around to Thursday and I said to her, I think I could do it. And I haven't even seen, the amount of times you've had to repeat yourself. Yeah. And this poor lad, bless him, he admitted he didn't think that he was cut out for that type of work, and he left on the Thursday. And Lynn just made a passing comment, oh, it's a shame, you don't want a job. And I said to her, what do you mean? Yeah, I want a job. Of course I want a job. What? She said, I thought you'd go back to university. I said, no, I've done that. I want work. So she ran into the MD's office, and 15 minutes later, she was handing me a temp contract in the property team, post-completions team. And I had a project to kind of get them up to date, and they gave me 4 months to do it, and I did it in 3. And I wasn't sure whether to be pleased with that or whether I'd just done myself out of a month's worth of work.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they said, look, we've got a permanent position for you. We'd like you to stay, but it's in the private client team.
Okay.
They sat me down, they talked through it, and they were saying, oh, you're going to write wills. And my face just must have looked absolutely horrified. I'm like, I can't do all this, this type of stuff. Anyway, I got into it, and the first time a client phoned me, I was chasing for some draft wills that we'd sent out, and we hadn't heard back. And it had turned out that we hadn't heard back because very suddenly the client's brother had passed away. And he got upset on the phone, and I just burst into tears on my side of the phone. Yeah. And I thought, how could I deal with this? And it really really impacted me. But by the end of the conversation, the client felt a lot lighter, and we'd spoken about him and the things that he loved most about him. And I genuinely got a real sense of satisfaction. And I thought, actually, I think there's a lot more to this than just kind of tax and numbers and that kind of thing. It's
I'm talking about death every day. I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? It's like people ask me, how can you do, you're talking about death and everything. It's not like that. It really is about helping people, isn't it?
It really is. And then I've always had an interest in further education. I always like to continue learning, and so for me there was just so much to learn from a technical point of view in that field. And then I continued working in that department for 3, almost 4 years, I believe, before I then started my training contract. And I worked directly for the head of the department and just absorbed everything that I could from her. And I kind of went from there.
It's brilliant, isn't it? Because I remember the very first Women in Wills that I went to, I sat next to a lady and I said, why did you do private client? And she said, it's like a quiz every day. You've got to work out what the best for your client. It's a challenge. It's not the same thing, repetitive time and time again, is it? It is doing the best for your client and having that little question every day to try and solve to give them the best of what they can get.
Absolutely. Every family is different. Every, you know, their personal estate is going to be different. Their priorities are going to be different. That,
Yeah.
you know, the place that they are in their life, any, you know, health conditions or worries they might have, they're all going to be different. And you do have to adjust quite a lot. So
So
here I
yeah, so
go.
you found your slot, which is a real benefit to the wheels and probate industry there. So let's look. I mean, the fantastic list of achievements I read out there at the beginning, especially for somebody who's so young, and not only for what you've achieved in your career, but also that you've overcome a lot of adversity. And that's kind of like the theme of today, that we all get adversity or challenges within our working life. And you know, it's really important to bounce back from that. You know, there's different challenges, whether you're a first-time mum, whether you're looking after elderly parents, whether you've got difficult backgrounds, whether you have got anxiety or mental health conditions. And I'm sure there's lots of people listening here today who are maybe just starting out in a career or suffering from those things and would love to know more about your journey. So, you know, where's your drive come from? What's behind this incredible desire to achieve and move yourself forward in your career?
So this is a tricky one, really. I've been asked this question quite a lot since I decided to start Circe. And the truth lies in the fact that I had a very, very traumatic upbringing. I come from a home where I've have alcoholic and physically abusive parents, that I then went on and you know, suffered with anxiety and various other things along with that. I was also groomed and sexually abused between the ages of 11 and 14. And we went through stages of, you know, real poverty, in losing houses, having bailiffs knock at the door, all that kind of thing. And this was all during, you know, my childhood.
Yeah.
And when you have to live in those environments, your drive becomes your will to survive, effectively.
Yeah.
So in those situations, it would be that, you know, if I just did better, if I just got better grades, if I just applied myself more, if I just, you know, did all these things, as a child, in a strange way, it's almost as if you're hoping that that then will gain you the approval and the reprieve that you want from this kind of treatment. And I never really understood that until I started getting asked this question about drive and really looking into it. And it's so true that when you have to keep pushing forward and keep trying to do that all the time, you know, when surviving every day is an effort, it's very hard to unlearn that behavior.
Yeah.
And so as I got older and I moved out of those abusive situations, what then happened is that sort of transferred to my work. Well, if I just do more, if I just, you know, get the extra qualifications, if I just do this and keep pushing and pushing, because there's like a little trigger, a little alarm bell in the back of my brain, where if I sit still, you know, if I'm in a safe environment and I'm still for a moment, there's still that kind of, you know, fight or flight type reaction that goes on in my brain. And I think that I need to be doing more, you know.
It
And
is
that's
that fight and flight scenario, isn't it? I mean, I'm mum to two adopted kids who we adopted when they were 4 and 6. And, you know, I live and see the impacts of those early year trauma on them. And, you know, there's positives and negatives to it with both mine. I've got one that's flight and one that's fight. But learning about that, how, you know, by the ages of 5 and definitely by the ages of 7, you know, those traumas have set your behaviors and your belief systems behind you to see that drive. It's phenomenal you've put that into a positive framework.
Well, I mean, the way that I saw it is, it was my education was a way out of that life. And I knew I'm one of the fortunate people that knew that they wanted to be a lawyer since I was honestly knee high. I think I was about 4 or 5 when I first started expressing the desire to be a lawyer. I think that I had seen an episode of Judge Judy, funnily enough, and I just thought, you know what, right? She doesn't take any shit. You know, that's what I want to do. Yeah. And I think I've always had, and this is the same with a lot of trauma survivors, we have a very profound sense of right and wrong.
Yeah.
And so it's not uncommon for us to enter professions where there is that element of right and wrong, law and order, or that you can help people who have been wronged or they are upset. So originally I always thought I'd go into crime, and I thought I would want to do prosecution. And funnily enough, I did serious crime. I was in the Crown Court team for part of my training contract. Yeah. It was defence work. But whilst I found it absolutely fascinating, I didn't love it the same way that I'd already fallen in love with private client and helping these individuals. So I ultimately came back to it, but it's still helping people. It's still that drive. And for
Absolutely.
me, yeah, and so my education, my career was my way of getting out of that. It was my route to breaking the cycles of poverty. It was my route to changing, this history, the generational abuse that has occurred, through my ancestors and various things.
Yeah.
And so I just really, really held on to that. And then, as I said, as I moved more out of those situations into much more safe environments, supportive environments, as an adult, I realized actually, yeah, I am safe. And maybe if I keep pushing and I keep going, I can create safe spaces for other people as well. And that's part of the ethos around Circe as a whole, to create that safe space so that lawyers can do what they do best.
Yeah.
And be happy doing it and supported doing it.
And be supportive, and that's the main thing. Well, thank you for sharing that, Jade. It's very personal, and but I think this kind of thing really helps other people and see where that drive comes from. Let's talk about, so we've talked about your first job and then going forward. Talk us through your career and how you've come to be now you're the CEO of your own law firm.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a bit chaotic, I have to say. I remember that, for any junior lawyers out there where they, they feel like qualifying is a million miles away. I always used to think that. I was like, I'm going to be 35 by the time I qualify. I'm going to be old. This is typical kind of like early 20s thinking, teenager thinking.
Especially being old by 35, I'll say that.
I know. Hindsight is such a funny thing, isn't it? Yeah. And for me, so I went to university. I was the type of student that I at GCSE and A level, I was getting straight A's. I was getting 100% in some of my exams. I was, typical head girl, A1 type personality, go off to university. And then suddenly I get really, really poorly. And I mean, I got so poorly. I was in pain all the time. Sometimes, and it was usually at that stage, it was all my chest and my arms, my upper body. And it was hard to breathe some days. And I remember there was one day that it took me half an hour to sit up in my bed. Just to sit up because I was in so much pain.
That's while you were at university still.
This was while I was at university. And, this was, before the Kindles and the iPads and everything, where you had to hike just, an entire library to and from the university.
Yeah.
And I at the time, I had to get help getting dressed sometimes. I had to have my partner help wash my hair because I couldn't lift my arms up, to do that. And I got really, really poorly, and I didn't actually get a lot of support from the university at the time. Later, after I graduated, I got a letter of apology from them for not supporting me. But because I didn't have a diagnosis, and it would take years to get that diagnosis, I'd be gone from uni by that time. I really struggled. And there was a time where I thought that I would not pass my degree. In fact, in my second year, the irony is that I failed my trust and equity module. I just fucked out. I did not understand it at all. It made no sense to me. And so I was missing a lot of classes, trying to catch up with it, but also knowing, being very aware of the limits of my body at this stage. And so I graduated university with a 2-2, and I thought that I wasn't going to get a job anywhere. I thought, you know what, if I can only be a paralegal for the rest of my life, say only, it's a great occupation, but if that's it for me and I can't be a solicitor, then that's what I'll do. I still love law. That's what I want to do. And this is where I got that week work experience. And then after I got the full-time position, and I'd worked in it for a couple of years, my MD took me aside one day and she said to me, Jade, you'll make a fantastic solicitor. Why aren't you doing your LPC? What's going on? And I sat down with her, and at the time, having gone through all of that trauma as a child, I didn't then enter my first sort of adult relationship in a healthy kind of way. And I wound up marrying this man that I'd been at school with when I was 22. And it was a disaster, to say the least. And I'd gone through a very messy divorce. And throughout that, I was so poor at times. At this point is when I cut off from my family at the same time. So I had zero support. I had very little income. I sometimes had to choose between putting petrol in my car to get to work or eating. That was the reality of it. And I said, I'd also discovered that my delightful mother had raised debts in my names on credit stores and all the rest of it. So when I applied to get the loan to start the LPC, I was rejected. And so I said to her, look, I can't do it. And she said, I tell you what, why don't we loan you the money to start your LPC? Because we want you to qualify so we can charge you out at a higher rate, And I said, honestly, I had never had such kindness like granted to me in my life, and I burst into tears. So we started it, and then she topped it off and she said, and what I want you to do is you do it part-time, you know, at the weekends, and that will take you 2 years. She said, but I'm going to start your training contract at the same time, so when you finish your LPC, you'll finish your training contract too.
Wow.
And I had no words for it, you know, it was amazing. And so that's what I did. So I had no life for 2 years, training full-time during the week, at the weekends, studying at university, that kind of thing. But it was fine, you know, not a stranger to hard work. So partway through that, they actually turned around and they said to me, it was my birthday actually, and they turned around and they said, Jade, as a thank you for all the hard work that you've done, we're just going to write the loan off. And again, you know, I couldn't believe it at all. Now, sadly, that firm actually suffered a mortgage fraud. And this is why I'm very risk averse these days, by the way. I keep saying, you're too risk averse, but you know. They had a mortgage fraud, and I still had 6 months left on my training contract when they closed down. So that lovely managing director helped me relocate my training contract. This is where I started then doing serious crime. And at the end of that, they said, look, you've got a choice. You can either go into crime or you can go into private client when you qualify. Opted for private client. Now, at this time, my previous firm, the one that had closed, had sold their will bank off to Aston Bond in Slough. And I had met with the owner there talking about the wills bank and how we can use it for marketing and all those kinds of things. And he was seemingly impressed with all of that. And he'd marked in his calendar the date that I qualified. And he texted me and he said, look, Jade, do you want to come across and be a fee earner in our department? And I thought, you know, no, thank you. And then he came back and he offered a bit more money and, you know, a bit more persistent. Then I actually started ignoring him because I thought, there's only so many ways I can say no. Then it sort of around Christmas, he had a bit of a strop, text me saying he'd at least come back to me. And then he sent me another one underneath saying, look, if you want it, I'll give you the head of department position and you can do whatever you like with the department. Just come across. And I thought, wow, you know, 6 months qualified, who gets that opportunity? And I thought, you know, this is terrifying for a start, but do I do it? Do I not? And so I took that jump, and I was at Aston Bond for 5 years, where I headed up their department. That's where I, you know, got the awards for the young practitioner and things, and really, really enjoyed it there. But I knew that if I wanted to take my career to the next level, I needed to look at kind of, you know, partnership options. And unfortunately, that wasn't an option at Aston Bond. So I then moved across to Meadows Ryan with a view to being made partner there. And in that process, I kind of reviewed where I was, and the opportunities arose that meant that if I wanted to, I could start my own firm. And so I took that with both hands, and ever since August last year, have been working to bring Circe Law to life. That's kind of how I got here.
Wow, that's incredible, and a really interesting journey there. And I'm sure for more junior people that have joined us today, that it would be a real inspiration of how you came forward. And I suppose that lends me to the next question, which is all about influences. I mean, that person that you had there at your first role that really believed in you and gave you that support, gave you that training contract, you know, lent you the money. You know, who or what have you had as the biggest influences in your life? Is there a mentor? Is it people that influenced, or have you found groups? Where's that support come from for you?
I mean, that MD definitely. Like I would not be here today, you know, if it wasn't for her in the position that I am. So I attribute all of that back to her, lovely Nicola. But also the head of department there as well, Lucy, who just answered all of my incessant questions and allowed me to say, well, actually, can I give that a go? And she, you know, she would let me. It was really encouraging. She never felt like, or I never felt like I was a threat to anybody by sort of learning more and wanting to do better and to push myself and everything else. She really nurtured that. And those two influences I try to emulate myself when it comes to any trainees that I have or support staff or anything like that. I always say to them, you know, when they say, oh my gosh, you know, you're up for this, or you're going to go do this cool opportunity or whatever it is. And I said, look, one day you're going to be doing much cooler stuff than I'm doing. And you're going to, you know, have way more awards than I have and that kind of thing. And I said, nothing will make me more proud than when you go on and do more, because that's my job, is to break down some of those barriers. So it is easier for you to go on and do more for the next generation. But I have found in the industry that quite often other practitioners see you as a threat. You know, if you're doing well, they want to keep you small, they want to put you down, they want to put those doubts in your mind, because for some reason it will make them feel inferior if you go on to do more or shine brighter than perhaps they might be. So I really do work on creating that really supportive and encouraging environment.
So have you got any advice for somebody who finds themselves in that situation? Because I mean, I do resonate in that in my career, which hasn't been in law, but been in different, commercial activities. You do get the ones, I mean, I know managing people, and I've managed very large teams, that those that are asking you lots of questions all the time, you don't mind. Yeah, you'd rather they ask the questions time and, to actually get a full understanding of what they're trying to do. So if there's somebody there that is finding themselves in that kind of situation where people don't like them asking questions, they feel a bit threatened, have you got any advice for those people on what they could do?
The ones that are being asked?
No,
or the ones asking?
Actually both. You've got the people there that feel that they're perhaps not feeling that they're a threat to the other person feels they're a threat. If people do feel like a threat, what can they do to get over that, I suppose?
If you're the boss in that situation, I would really encourage you to remember that you can get just as much from the relationship as the person underneath you can, that you're mentoring or whatever it might be. And it might not be in the ways that you expect. You might not be learning, detailed kind of tax advice or anything from them. That might be what you're teaching them, but in other ways they are going to shape you and mold you. And that if you genuinely care about the profession, if you care about your clients, then you should want those people to go on and excel, because they're the next generation. When we're retired, they're the ones that are going to be leading the charge, and we want people who are totally able, to take care of those clients. And if you are the person that is struggling with a boss that is trying to keep you small, please just remember that it is not about you. That is all them, right? That's issues that they have to deal with and to work through. It isn't about you. And actually, if you're the type of person that does want to go on and make changes, right, in the industry, that you want to make a difference, that you want to give back, and you find that you feel like you're being kept small, chances are you're on the right track, because they wouldn't be trying to keep you small if you were small. Do you see what I mean? You've you've got the potential to go on and do big things. So just keep that in mind. And these phases, they're like seasons. They will change who you are, don't alter what you're doing. Keep going, and the season will change and it will come in your favor.
Yeah, and be true to yourself, I think. Yeah, absolutely. And communicate. I think communication is really key. So, I mean, that's obviously a key challenge that somebody could be facing. What are the key challenges, or what are the biggest challenges that you found in your career?
Oh, lots. Having my disabilities is one of them. I mean, that's a challenge in itself. I have short-term memory problems. Sometimes I say the wrong word and don't even know. Like, I could try to say a date like March and I would say the word sausage and people are laughing and I'm thinking, what have I said? Whoops. Physically it can be difficult because there's only so much I can do. I've had to learn to know my limits and be kind to myself. I was never kind to myself as a child because I wasn't treated with kindness. And so learning how to be kind to myself, I could be kind to other people. I wanted to protect them. I wanted to help them. I wanted to look after them, but I never really applied that to myself. So, as an adult, I've had to learn that, and it's quite tricky. Other obstacles I've faced is just being a young woman, and also an opinionated young woman. If I don't, if I don't agree with something, I can't lie. I'm an awful liar. My friends think it's hilarious, considering I'm a lawyer, and the reputation that we have elsewhere. But if something doesn't seem right to me or I don't like it, the face is going to tell you straight away, and when you are an opinionated young woman, it is easy, especially for men who tend to be in the more senior positions in the legal profession, just statistically speaking. It's easy for them to brush you aside and just think, oh, she's just another like crazy feminist, or off she goes again. And you have to keep saying, no, these are important issues. We have to examine these things. And then, on top of that, so with the disabilities, being a young woman, I'm also mixed race. Now, I have difficult I struggle with my own identity sometimes. It's very closely linked to my dad, which is now very closely linked with grief. And for me, most of my life, you know, I've been passable. But I find in certain situations, certainly with older generations, I'm really not. And I'm reminded that actually, you know, I'm other in certain situations. So you know, it's been hard to instigate change and to raise these issues, because some people are just going to see you as being the angry young brown girl or whatever it is. You know, if you've got a disability and you're saying, well, actually, I can't have an office upstairs because when I'm in a flare, I can't walk, you know, never mind climb stairs. And it's just, or if you're asking to take the day to work from home, and then they're like, oh, fine, but it's all the huffs and the puffs and everything else, because they just don't understand, and they don't realize how important, you know, those days are. If I take the day at home to rest, it means I'm not going to be in a flare for 2 weeks later down the line. So what's the best solution? Is I've always found that where I've worked, a lot of the senior management have been quite short-sighted when it comes to those things. You know, they're only looking at the immediate picture and their very bottom line right now. And so I've kind of flipped that, and I'm trying to do the opposite with it at Circe as well, and have a longer term perspective on these things, giving lots of holiday, being super flexible with work, even when sometimes, it gets inconvenient. But actually, I would rather the staff know that genuinely I want them to be happy, comfortable, and able to work in a way that suits them. So lots of obstacles.
No, lots of obstacles. And you know, I mean, we Arkham, we do the 4-day working week, and just the difference that's made just to have that bit of space to just do life admin, if nothing else. You know,
exactly that. And you know, a lot of lawyers do those hours anyway in those the 5 hours in 4 days anyway. And I would probably be more productive across those 4 days and that kind of thing. And it's just, you know, we've got different options. I offered the 4-day week, and one of my staff asked if we could do actually a 9-day fortnight. And I thought, well, why not? Like, I say to them, I don't care where you work, when you work, how you work, you know, whatever it is, as long as the clients are happy and you're meeting our business needs.
That's the main thing.
I don't care. Exactly. If you as a business say, I need you to meet this target, and your staff is meeting that target, why do you care about anything else in between if those clients are happy? You know. So I want to give a lot of that control back to our staff, and it's the same with like salaries and things like that. Coming from obviously a very low income background, for me, money has always been difficult to talk about, and we know that there is a huge gender pay gap still in the industry. I mean, last I checked, I think it was about 19%. You know, it truly awful. And so instead, you know, I put the power back to them. Some people want to come in and just do their 9 to 5 and go home, and they're happy with kind of an average salary. Other people really want to push themselves and excel and be rewarded for that. So we link our salaries to our targets, and that those targets are an open conversation between us about what's reasonable, what's practical, and everything else. And you know then exactly what you'll get paid for that target. If our staff are beating their targets for 6 months consistently in a row, it triggers an automatic pay review. And I would say, well, actually, you've been billing £2,000 over your target for the past 6 months. So should we up your target by that and up your pay at the same time? And you know, there's things that haven't made sense to me in the past, like having a bonus of 10% above, you know, what you bill over your target. And I think, well, the old metric is that your target is 3 times your salary. So why aren't you paying closer to a third of what is billed over that? Surely that's all excess. That's all plus for you. You want to encourage them to do it. And I sit there and I think, you know, is this like good business? This doesn't make sense to me. So I think that as lawyers, we're often taught to be lawyers, and we're not taught to be business individuals. And I've been fortunate enough to be surrounded by people in all different industries, IT, tech, HR, all that kind of thing. And I've absorbed the things that I know work in other industries, but we just don't see in the legal profession, certainly outside of the city.
Absolutely. And looking outside in other industries is really eye-opening at times, isn't it? Let's delve down into the imposter syndrome, because this one I find absolutely fascinating. I know you've spoken about this. I held some events for women in logistics when I was working in the logistics industry, and I do remember an event where it was the first event. We got all these like multi-million-pound MDs, CEOs of logistics companies or manufacturers, etc., up there, and it was all women. And this lady, fantastic lady, she was an MD of a Japanese truck manufacturer, and she stood up there, and the first thing she said is, put your hand up if you ever, as a woman, wake up in the middle of the night and think, oh my God, they're going to find me out. I can't do it. And every single body's in the room, their arm went above their head. You know, it is a real women's trait that we don't think we're good enough. You know, there's a lot out there in terms of interviews. We'll be very open and honest. Men will probably say that they could do something they've never done before.
All the time.
All the time. And we'll give the advice, or we'll think we can't do it. So talk to me about how the imposter syndrome for you manifested itself and how you overcame that.
I mean, it's huge. I feel it every single day. You know, I check myself. Who am I to give this opinion? Who am I to answer that question? Who am I to be asked to come and talk about my experiences on this show? Like, you know, nobody wants to listen to that and that kind of thing, because we, you know, as women, we do tend to have that voice in the back of our minds saying, you know, in some way we're not quite good enough. And more recently, and certainly setting up Circe, I had the opportunity to look at things slightly differently. And I realized that I think it's a Michelle Obama quote where she's asked, you know, how does it feel to have a seat at the table? And she just said, well, when you look around and it's just full of mediocre men, like, you suddenly think, well, what? And I, you know, so I started looking around, and I'm looking at, you know, firms that I work for and all the rest of it. And as lovely as they are, would I consider them, you know, particularly special to deal with this? Are they, you know, these exceptional, you know, individuals that you couldn't touch, you know, that are in the stratosphere? They're not. They're just
ordinary, like
ordinary individuals. And I thought, well, if they can do it,
like you and me,
I can do it, you know. She says. But yeah, it definitely has been hard. And for me, that started with sort of winning the awards and getting the kind of highlight. I suppose it was probably evident when I first took on the head of department position at Aston Bond, being only 6 months qualified, because people would look at me and they'd be like, what? And, you know, my boss, when I left the firm before, actually turned around and told me that I was too big for my boots, that I was going to fail, because I sat her down and said, look, I've been offered this, but what are my opportunities here? You know, I want to get more involved. And she just said, for like my job, and that I wouldn't get any extra responsibilities until at least 3 years PQE. And I just thought, wow, okay. So that really made my decision. And I went across, but then obviously starting to advise on high net worth estates and things, when I have come from such a poor background, that feeds into it as well. Who am I to tell these people how to plan with all their millions of pounds? Yeah, exactly. And it kind of progressed from there. And then when I started to get these awards and get this recognition, and, you know, people kind of starting to follow the journey and everything else, I thought, you know, who am I to be this person? Like, I'm nothing special. You know, don't look to me for that kind of advice. And it spirals from there. And then when I look back on it, sometimes I have to sit there and remind myself and kind of list off some of the things that I have achieved and give myself a little bit of a pep talk and say, there is a reason for this, you know. And actually, if the world is telling you that you're doing a good job, start believing that you're doing a good job, you know.
Listen to it. It's easy to listen to the bad things, isn't it? You know, the one bad thing in 10, you're gonna remember the bad thing. You're not going to remember the 9 good things. So having that real focus on the good things and remembering when people saying thank you or well done, good job.
Exactly.
You know, I think that, and that's good for us as managers as well, to remember to constantly say that.
Absolutely, that reassurance, and let them know when they're on the right track.
Especially if they're dealing with a woman who might be feeling about imposter syndrome there.
Exactly. And, you know, I had a real wake-up call with this when in my last role I was gearing myself up to have a salary negotiation with one of the partners, and I just, you know, I was stressing about it. I had all my I love a spreadsheet, so I had all my projections. I had, you know,
arguments about why, what
everything,
you've done, what you've delivered.
In the past, I had all my other like comparable jobs and the salaries they were paying and things like that. You know, I've gone in really prepared into this meeting. But just before I went in, I was talking to one of the other directors who I was quite friendly with. And I was saying to him, look, this is what I've asked for and all the rest of it, and just trying to get some advice. He'd told me that at that point that he was soon to be leaving, which wasn't common knowledge. And so his allegiance had sort of shifted a little bit. And so he just gave me honest, and he looked at me and I said, so look, this is what I've done in the past year. This is what I think I'm going to do next year. So I'm going to ask. And what I was asking for was based on what I'd done in the previous year. And he said to me, he went, no, Jade, no. Right. And I'm thinking, what?
Is it on the next?
I said, where have I gone wrong? He said, you don't know. He went, you go into those meetings and you say, this is what I'm going to do, so you're going to pay me that now because that's what I'm going to do, right? You don't go, this is what I have been doing at a lower rate, not getting paid your worth, and then go, okay, now start paying me for it. And I swear my mind blew, and I had a conversation about this with so many of my girlfriends, and I said, if you were in this situation, what would you do? They would do exactly the same thing. We feel like we have to prove our worth before we get paid our worth, but for some reason a lot of men just know their worth. And that's it. They won't compromise.
It's interesting because the motto that's always been given me is you work at the next level up to then be given it. So yeah, it is very much like that, isn't it? You feel like you need to be doing the next job before you're rewarded for it. Yeah,
absolutely. So I took his advice, and I was shaking like a leaf when I went in there, and I thought, I can't get these words out of my mouth. And I went in, and I wound up walking away with about a 20% pay rise, I think it was at the time, which was, huge for me. And I was absolutely gobsmacked, and it worked. Just that approach. And I just think that sometimes we are wired slightly differently as women because of just growing up in a patriarchal world as women, where we're told what we can and what we can't do, what we should wear, what we shouldn't wear, where we can go, what we can't, where we're blamed for everything, even when we are the victims of kind of, male aggression or whatever it might be. I think we then get wired ever so slightly differently. And I know that's a generalization.
But what a difference it makes also when you work for a man that does get it and does see our value. Obviously women see other women's values, but I've worked for various men throughout my career, and it is really nice, and you just feel so much more comfortable. Email is recognizing your worth, and it doesn't matter to them whether you're male, female, black, white,
absolutely,
whatever it happens to be. So yeah, it does make a massive difference. And a lot of these situations, they can lead to anxiety, they can lead to burnout, and you've been vocal in saying that that's something that you've suffered with throughout your career. How have you dealt with that, and if you had much support through that with the people that you're working for? How do you feel? Obviously you're being very supportive of your staff now in your own way. You've got the control to be able to do so. How have you dealt with that throughout your career?
It's been hard. I mean, when I say that I suffer with sort of anxiety and depression, which is natural given all the things that I've gone through when I was quite young. I mean, I have gone through serious bouts of OCD. I've had panic attacks. I have had anxiety so crippling I can't get out of my bed. I've had depression so dark that I think every minute of every day about taking my own life. It's that's been a thing in the past in those periods. And because of the type of abuse that I received, a lot of it was always secret. It's behind closed doors. So any feelings you have associated with that, you then start to learn as a child to keep those secret and to keep those inside, and then they tend to fester. And actually, I have started, and it was quite a trigger for me that when this sort of sexual abuse and grooming ended for me, it was because I managed to step away and remove myself from that. And then this person, this man, he moved off to Australia, and I didn't hear anything for over 10 years. And then one day I walked in to my office early in the morning. It's usually just me and one of the partners who I was on such good terms with, still am. He's a huge supporter. And he became like a surrogate dad to me. And I sat down, and normally I have a bit of banter in the morning, and he walked past my desk and was like, oh, morning, and then carried on walking, and then did a backstop because he saw the look on my face. And he came around, and I just received an email from this abuser to my work email address, and it just said something really simple like "Good morning, gorgeous," or something along those lines. And I had regretted for a long time and blamed myself that I hadn't gone to the police about what had happened to me when I was a lot younger. And he had contacted me, and to be honest, it brought my world down quite a bit.
Yeah,
it really shook me. I had always told myself that I was over it, I'd recovered from that. You never really are, the truth is. And so at that point I decided to go to the police, and work was so supportive. And my anxiety, because with the time difference, I never knew every morning if I was coming in and seeing a new message. I decided I was going to engage with him and see if he would admit to some of what was going on, and I would hand that over to the police, and then I could rest my conscience over that. And people, I even had one of the police officers at the time when I phoned up to talk about these messages, and he was just like, why would you engage with him? What are people going to think of you for talking to him? Like, he was trying to really victim shame me. And in the middle of the office, I stopped and I just went, I don't give a shit what people think about me. This is about protecting other people now, and you should see that. And, you know, actually, you're off my case, like, refer it to a manager. So he, that shook me. And what I did is that I actually retreated from my work, and my boss was really good. He said, look, do what you need. And I said, I can't actually handle the face-to-face with the clients, the constant ringing the phone, because in my head, I'm thinking, is it him? Is it this? Is it that? And so my team just rallied around me, and they did all the front-facing stuff. And in the background, I could just keep my head down and deal with that. And I spoke very openly about how depressed I was feeling and how anxious I was feeling at the time. And every day, everyone would stop by my office and say, how's today? And I'd just be like, you know, same over and over and over. I'd come into work sometimes and I'd have a little chocolate bar left on my desk, or I'd have a little post-it note, and they were just so, honestly, so supportive that it warmed my heart. And then after a couple of months, I started to feel more like myself again. I was more in control. And I realized that that period of me feeling really dark was actually a lot shorter than it had ever been in any of my other, you know, instances. And I think that that very much was being open about it and not having to plaster a, you know, a smile on my face and pretend and keep it inside, because instead of it festering, I was airing it out. And I've had that chance to breathe a lot sooner. So I'm trying to do that now when, you know, when I've lost people, you know, I've been bereaved and things, I've been very open about that as well. And again, I go through these periods where I retreat a little bit, and I'm given that grace and that space by the people around me. And then all of a sudden, just one day I wake up and I'm feeling better, you know, than I was.
It's so important to have that supportive network and environment, isn't it? I think that is really supportive. But your advice there, to just be open with it. You know, people might not necessarily know that you're struggling or that something is going on in your life. And it doesn't matter how junior you are, share that, because it's amazing when you talk about different things. Like when we adopted, you know, it's amazing. You talk to somebody and you say, yes, I've adopted my kids. It's amazing how many other people have had some kind of scenario that is related to it. So you don't know that other people don't get exactly what you're talking about.
And it's just that. And I think there's nothing to be ashamed of if you are struggling, not at all. I know people say that on, you know, online and all the rest of it, but we still have that fear, don't we? That niggling doubt, you know, as women, in the back of our minds, am I going to be judged? Are they going to think I'm weak? Think I'm not capable? Whatever it is. But honestly, consider just for a moment, if your best friend told you that they were struggling like that, what's your response going to be? Are you going to tell them that they're weak? Are you going to tell them that you're not capable of doing anything? No. It's going to be love and support and whatever they need.
Put the kettle on, I'm coming now.
Exactly that. And I think that is part of the absolute pure joy of being a woman, is that it's like the, you know, on a night out, like the girls' bathroom, like that's the place to be. Do you know what I mean? The support and everything you have there is the support that you can get here. And you don't have to go into the details. You don't have, I was very brutally honest. And I did say to everybody, given the subject, and not knowing what they've gone through in their lives, look, if you ever would just want to talk to me about it, like, don't shy away from asking questions. I will tell you if I'm not up to answering them then, but, you know, I don't want you to shy away from a certain subject or anything like that. And just, you know, be showing them as well. And then I found after that, I had a lot of other people that were approaching me and wanting to talk about either similar circumstances, or they want to talk about their anxiety or talk about their depression. And I think that's great. The more we talk about it, the more we can normalize it, and the more we feel like we can experience it out loud and on display without feeling any kind of shame.
Absolutely, I completely agree with you there. I'm conscious of time, and it's been fantastic talking already, but I do have one question. You do so much, okay? You've co-founded the Wishing Will Foundation, you've started your own business. Sounds like you're a great mentor for your staff there as well. What does your work-life balance look like? What do you do outside of work to de-stress, to unwind, to give you breathing space? I mean, it's like, you know, what's that look like for you, Jade?
I mean, for me, I always say to people that I have more hours in the day than most people, because I'm not married, I don't have children or anything like that. So I do feel like I have more hours, you know, in the day, because I don't have those additional responsibilities. I do work an awful lot, and that is because I love it. I know there's that phrase that you should work to live and not live to work, but I actually very firmly believe that if you love what you do, then you do live to work, and there is nothing wrong about that at all. I don't think we should feel, you know, shamed into being workaholics when we enjoy it, you know, and it's healthy and supportive.
Yeah.
But outside of work, I mean, I have ADHD, so I get hyper focuses on certain things. It goes through like cycles. So I'm back in a hyper focus with reading at the moment, and that means that I'll read about 3 books a week. And people go, well, where do you get the time to read like 3 books a week? And I think, well, I zone in. I don't get enough time to do it, but I quite like art. I've always found that like quite a form of escapism and expressionism. And I enjoy kind of watching live events or sports, that kind of thing. I'm a huge rugby fan, so obviously it's just been the Six Nations, which I'm not prepared to talk about right now because you know how that went. But I think it's just, and there's nothing wrong with not having like hobbies as such. If you just enjoy spending time with your friends, which I do, and with my sort of nieces and nephews, all the kids, if you just spend time doing that, or going out having drinks and having dinner and things, I think that's fine. As long as you know when you need that little valve release, which I do. I get to a certain point where I go, right, work's taken over too much, and then I go and spend it with those people that make my soul sing. That's where I get my joy and my recharge.
And just things like art and reading, which is just quiet stuff you can do yourself, just give yourself that peace, is really, really good. So what advice, as we come towards the end, what advice would you give to the next generation of solicitors, particularly a woman solicitor who's looking to be successful in their career? What do you wish that you knew then that you know now?
I wish I knew then that, these very sometimes intimidating men and things in the industry, they're not always all that. We create this image of them being bigger than they are in our minds. And I wish I knew then that I didn't have to hurry. Because like I said, when I was, in my early 20s, I thought, oh my gosh, it's going to take forever. And now I'm like, well, I try to do the maths sometimes. And I think, how, when I was 22, did I think I wouldn't be qualified until I was 35? And now I'm 32 and I've been qualified for more years than I can remember. All those kinds of things. Like, don't rush. It's all part of the process. You're learning every step along the way. Just soak it up. Soak up as much as you can, whatever, and you wish you could go back to that sense of no responsibility thing. It's the same, in the early stages of your legal career. So enjoy it while it lasts.
And for those kind of people, are there any specific qualifications, associations, courses? Is there anything you would recommend they get involved in, or things that they read? Or
yeah, absolutely. For more junior members, I would really strongly advise, if they're in private client, signing up to Solicitors for the Elderly. I know that I'm a director for them and it's not like a push or anything, but one of the most helpful things I found is I sometimes was afraid to ask certain questions because I felt like this is like really simple, but I'm not quite getting it. Something's not quite clicking here. And you were too afraid to ask, but they have this beautiful forum where you can ask. Some of the emails start, am I having a moment? Or like, this seems too simple, but is it a trick kind of thing? Is it a trick answer type thing? So you can just ping whatever you like in there. You can just like word vomit whatever's going through your mind on there, and nobody judges you, and people will come back to you and support you. They'll provide you with different precedents or things you can do, advice, all that kind of thing.
Okay.
So as a junior lawyer, I think that
we
that
did.
is,
oh, right. Okay. Pop them through.
Oh, sorry, somebody's come off mute there.
Yeah, sorry. So I would suggest that. And as you start to progress more technically, then I would definitely look towards things like STEP, in order to just build on that, because I thought I knew a lot, and then I started doing my STEP diplomas and I thought, oh my god, I know nothing. And yeah, they're really good organizations for resources and support, so I would recommend that.
Brilliant. I don't think we've got many questions there, so I think for me, I would just like to close up by saying thank you, Jade, for being very open, very honest. I'm sure it's helped a lot of people here today, that you've overcome things in your past, the challenges that you faced, and that you can really come out on top. You can succeed if you've got a nice supportive network around you, and the Women in Wills is exactly that. That's what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be supporting us all in that kind of scenario, which I think is wonderful there. And I've got it's interesting that you talked about Michelle Obama, because I found a quote of hers which I think sums up what we've been talking about today, which is, Whether you come from a council estate or a country estate, your success will be determined by your own confidence and fortitude. And I think, Jade, that kind of sums you up.
Thank you.
Really. Your confidence, your fortitude is what's driven you to be where you are today. So thank you very much. It's been a fantastic first interview for the Women in Wheels interview series. We do have the next one coming up. It's already in the diary there for the 7th of June at 11 a.m. And we're going to be talking there. The theme there is going to be more about resilience. How do we keep going in the wills and probate industry, how it can take an emotional toll on occasions, and how you can build strategies there to protect your well-being. And I'll be joined by the wonderful Michelle Barden-Daintree and Eleanor Evans. So Michelle is an Associate Director at Simpson Solicitors, part of the Right Legal Group there, and a Director at JBD Law. And Eleanor is a partner at Hugh James and leads a large team there dealing with estates and trust administration, is a full member of STEP. So I really hope that you'll join us there on the 7th of June, which for what I'm sure will be another fantastic interview with some of the key women players within our industry. But thank you very much for joining today. And once again, Jade, thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Right, take care, everybody.